Chad Blake, I saw doing this, which made me feel like, oh, why not? Why have I avoided this for so long? Basically, I'll take all the drums, send it to the drum bus. I saw Chad doing a sample of a trigger sample, like using Trigger 2, which I love, Slate plugin. It's great because you could throw up any combination of kick samples or make your own. And then now, typically what I used to do was send that to the drum bus. So the dried drum bus and the parallel drum bus, which was crushed. And then that would go to the mix bus. Well, what's happening is it's doubling up on mix bus compression, mix bus saturation. It's doubling up on anything that's happening on the drum bus, and now it's also there. So understanding that routing makes so much difference, because why would you necessarily want to do that with a kick track that was recorded pristinely and probably has some EQ and compression on it, which is why it sounds so good? I mean, most likely it's not an unprocessed sample, most likely. So as a result, you got this great sounding kick that you're then smushing and destroying. I saw Chad send his directly to the mix bus, and I was like, why aren't I doing that? And as soon as I started doing that, first of all, I loved it, because now all of a sudden the kick on a sample, so just the kick sample, not the kick in or kick out, although you could do it with any of those too, potentially. But just by sending the sample of the kick directly to the mix bus, now made it where the kick was just more punchy, and it wasn't getting as smushed before the mix bus. Because even if you're using that dry drum track, you're probably putting something on it. Like, I like a clipper on the drum bus that's dry, just to kind of keep a natural sound, but just still shave off some of those peaky snare. It kind of pushes the snare in the mix, it pushes the kick in the mix, and just sort of it gets it where the red lights aren't on the drum track, but it also allows you to bring the fader up enough, so it kind of just holds things in place, is the best way to put it. A lot of guys I've seen will do a few dB on a clipper just to kind of put it back together, but that will work until you get almost done with the mix and the levels are perfect. Now, a lot of times you need a little more out of the kick all of a sudden. So this has happened, and what I used to do was try to go back and EQ a little more out of the kick, maybe duplicate the kick track or run like a Sans amp or something to give it just some extra presence. Rather than do all that, just take that sample, send it directly to the mix bus, and now watch how much all of a sudden now the kick is so important. It'll also influence how the compression on your mix bus is working. So it'll kind of create more of this groovy ducking or like vibe with the compressor, is what I found, which I like a lot. But here's the other thing that people tend to do, so avoid this at all costs. Don't throw everything now onto the mix bus directly with the same idea. I'm all for, like, a direct path in mixing is usually the way that makes things sound the best. In other words, the less crazy routing hoops you have to jump through usually creates a better result. That comes directly from John Haynes talking about how him and Serban work the simplest possible way. A lot of times you'll get stuff, from people to mix that has all this stuff on it, and you take all the stuff off. It sounds way better in your setup where you can actually hear, and maybe they were in a janky setup with janky monitoring or whatever, and they couldn't hear, so they made all this stuff, adding to the problems, plug-in after plug-in after plug-in. They'll take stuff off, and 9 times out of 10, it's way better once they take things off. And he's not the only one to say that. Chris Lord-Alge's been saying it. It's like everybody says this who's in the know, that most of the time you're hurting it with the plugins. So the first thing I do when a mix isn't working out is literally start taking things off. Start taking them off one at a time. See what's, all of a sudden you'll pop something off and be like, wow, that was killing it right there. Also, consider the fact that not everything should get to the mix bus directly. In other words, like a snare drum, like when I did that to the kick, I'll give you a good example. I was like, wow, the kick sounds so much better. I love this. Well, I could maybe make the snare a little better too, so I send that there. Could maybe make the lead vocal a little better, so I send that there. Now, all of a sudden, nothing's better, because everything is now going directly to the mix bus without that internal, like, it wasn't putting the vocals together anymore. It all of a sudden makes everything worse, because the thing with contrast is if you have everything the same or going to the same, it's just, there's no contrast. So you almost needed everything to be where it was for the kick to punch out. Whereas as soon as you send so many things there, it's not going to be the same anymore. It won't sound as good. If everything's loud, nothing's loud. So that's You have to learn this concept, and most people who've mixed for a long enough time use that concept with everything, even things they don't realize they're using it with. It's just ingrained in them. You use the darkness to create a big bright moment at a point. You use filters to darken things up to then take them off, and now it's bright. You could do it on low and high end. You could do it with reverb by making something super dark. You could make it, have no reverb or a lot of reverb and then none. Just any kind of contrast is better than not. I'll look for places in songs I can remove things to create bigger moments thereafter. So don't send everything directly to your mix bus is the biggest point, but also that concept, little one thing, grab something. This is not a foreign concept. A lot of albums you love, things happen in this way, and I don't know if it's talked about as much as it should be. This is a tip that I find useful probably all the time, but the things I send will be different every mix. So it's not always just the kick sample. Sometimes it's the kick in mic if I'm not using a sample. Sometimes it'll help to create like a distorted version of the kick, and consider where you're sending things, especially when you're doing parallel processing. I can't tell you how many times I've in a lesson told people, like, you have to explain your routing to me, because so many times the mix will come down to what misunderstanding do you have about something you're doing. So it's almost like I need them to explain to me what they're doing, and then I could find the hole in what they're saying, and then we'll point to it. And as soon as we clear that up, it's like finding the part of it's like figuring out how to untangle a wire that's all jankied up. You basically, if we just hoop through here and come back, perfect. Now things untangled. It's the same thing. So many times people will use parallel compression, and they will literally saturate, compress, do all this stuff, then send it to another place to compress, saturate, and make it all, parallel. I'm like, it's not going to give you what you want now, because you've already destroyed the transients, and now you're putting it in a place that's going to do what? Destroy the transients more, and you're going to, how is that going to be good? That works the best when you don't destroy the transients and you keep them clean and punchy. And then you also have a version with destroyed transients blended in with it. Now we got a party. This all comes down to workflow, and there's no right or wrong. Maybe you're the guy who's like, my band is called Smush Transients. Well, if that's the case, you're doing it right, I guess. But, no right or wrong. We're making art over here. And this is something else I want you to take from this. We're making art for the sake of loving what we're doing, really. And also, secondarily, in hopes that there's people who are willing to actively listen to the art we make. It doesn't mean that many people will. If you find a small group of people who love what you're doing and actively listen, in other words, they sit there and they let it consume them as you would someone who cared about, like, going to a museum and looking at pieces of art. It's rare, but those people exist who want to be moved by something, and they will look at it. In other words, they're not looking at their phone too. They don't want to take pictures of everything. They're not somewhere else. They're not listening passively in the background. They want something to move them, or to just be enlightened by a moment, a little bit of time. They want something that's going to cause a reaction in their brain. And as a result, they put on music and they sit there and let it do what it's going to do. They listen, like the way we used to when we would put on an album that just came out and we didn't have all these distractions. We'd sit there and be like, okay, let's hear, what Californication sounds like. I remember it like it was yesterday. Me and my two best friends sitting around, just kind of hanging out and being like, I can't wait to hear what this album sounds like. That we, both. It was like the weekend plan. It was like, we're psyched. We're hanging out Friday, right? Yeah, we're gonna listen to that album. Great. Just, what does this sound like? And then just being like, letting it take over for what we're doing, letting it be the activity. If you find the people that want to do that with your music, and it's even if it's just a handful, you're doing well, man. You're doing real well. So change the perspective of what you're striving for. You don't want the masses, most likely. You want that. And if the masses will do that, great, but you're not shooting for that. You're making art for you, because you love to do it and you are creating an emotion within yourself and you're just hoping when you share it, other people feel the same way. I mean, in my opinion, that's the goal. And when we're mixing, we're going for the same thing. We're going for, are we bringing the emotion out of this? And how do we bring the emotion out? And that's why I get to a tip like this, because a lot of times you put something directly in the mix bus that's not smushed, and now all of a sudden you're going to bring the emotion out in a different way. And probably, like if it's kick, that's that thumping heartbeat in your chest. It's really hard to make a mix sound great when that gets swallowed up. So, a lot of times people are doing a lot of stuff on their mix bus. If you have an active, colorful mix bus with saturation and compression and EQ, it's like, consider the fact that you're doubling up if you're saturating, compressing, and EQ on the drum bus also. And it might not be the best move, especially if you got like a nice smiley face on your mix bus, especially then. How much low end you trying to put in the thing between the beginning and the end, and now you think it's going to be better. No, it doesn't make it better. It just makes, everybody with a Bluetooth speaker, the speaker will fart out. It might sound great on your monitors because they can handle low end, or they're designed to make you think they sound great, so there's so much low end. But as soon as you put that on a thing that can't handle it, it's all over. So that's another thing. I stress, everybody has something that will fart out when you hit it with too much low end. Put that smack on the middle of your desk and always get an output from your interface into that so that it tells you when you have too much low end. Because I think I'd say probably 85, maybe 80% of mixers that are pros do that today. And it's a tip that's slept on. Some people do it, but it's a tip it's been around for a while, but it's a tip that's slept on because cubes were kind of a thing where you had to make the mid-range work, but this is a different thing. Those little things, those little Bluetooth speakers that are not mono, they're stereo, but it's a Bluetooth speaker coming from one place. They do a fake stereo kind of thing. Those things can handle low end, because if they couldn't actually handle a good amount of low end, nobody would like them. They'd sound tinny and gross, and people would be like, this sucks, I'm buying a better one. They make it where it has enough low end, so it's a boost of the low end. So if you give it something with too much low end, bells will go off. Freaking, you'll see birds in the sky being like, too much low end, too much. So it's too much. You'll be able to tell, and you'll fix everything. Trust me. That should be one of your outputs in your interface. I just sounded very New York right there for a second. One of your outputs. Listen, put one of your outputs. Trust me. It helps. I hope you guys like it. Leave a comment. Anything that could help anybody, throw it in there. Enlightening. That's what we want over here. Everybody remember, have fun with this. You're making art. All right? Custom Cut Studios, Evan Jaffe. You guys got this. Take it easy.